When you think of a loading spinner to use within your website, you probably think an image or a font icon or something like that. But what we're going to be doing in this video is styling up what you can see here spinning around with pure CSS. And we're going to be using CSS3 animations and a little bit of trickery just to achieve this. So the actual circular shape you can see is just normal CSS. There's no magic here at all, some border radius, etc. And then we use the animation to spin this infinitely. So let's jump in and look straight at the code and build this up. It's super easy. So let's first of all look at the markup. We're only going to have one element here, and that's just going to contain the entire spinner. We don't have any pseudo elements or any nested elements or anything like that. It is super simple. So I'm just going to create a div with a class of spinner. Now obviously this can be any element, but div's probably appropriate here. So we've got this spinner, it's going to be empty here, and as you can see I've got a basic document layout with a style sheet linked in at the top here, and that at the moment is empty, so we are completely building this from scratch. So let's first of all actually build the circular shape to our spinner. So at the moment on our page we don't have anything, but if we go ahead and take a look at the actual markup here, we can start to play around with this as we go along. So let's target this spinner class then, and let's define a width and a height first of all. So let's say 30 pixels either, because we want this to be a perfect circle. Obviously at the moment though, you're not going to get a circle. If I temporarily add a background color just to this, you'll be able to see that we have just a box like this. But what we're going to do is, to get the effect of the outside ring, is we're going to create a border. So you can imagine if I create a fairly thick border, say 6 pixels, this obviously needs to be solid, it doesn't have to be, but probably works best, and we'll make this black. So we've now got this border on all corners like the following. So to make this into a circle, that's really straightforward. We just use the border radius CSS3 property, which luckily now doesn't require any vendor prefixes unless you want to go back to very older versions of browsers. And we've now got a circle. So we've got our circle here, it's looking good. So now what we want to do is we want to change the border left, bottom and right color to create a sort of gradient effect. So we're not going to have a true gradient here, but we are going to create a gradient which will look good enough when it's spinning. So let's change the border left color. So let's actually get rid of this border radius and put that down there. So the border left color is going to be a slightly lighter gray, if you like, or slightly lighter black. So it's a gray color. And then we're going to change the border bottom color, which will be next to the left, obviously. And we're going to again make that something like 555. So this is midway between white and black. Okay, so that's done. Let's take a look at this now. So it's looking a little bit nicer, but what I now want to do is cut off part of this by making part of the border transparent. So you'll probably have guessed we want to change the border right color to transparent, so transparent. So now we get the following, like so. So we've got a spinner. You can see if I just zoom in a little bit here that we've got a black color here, slightly lighter here, and then again slightly lighter with transparency. So this is good enough. It's only a loading spinner, and you know, it looks fine. So now what we want to do is actually apply the animation to this. So this is probably the hardest part, particularly including all of the different vendor prefixes that we do require with this experimental technology. So the first one that we're going to include is the default keyframes rule. So we use the @ symbol for rules, and this is keyframes, and then we give it a name. So this is the name of our animation. We're quite lucky in this sense that the animation is actually quite simple. All we want to do is rotate it 360 degrees and make that infinite. So I'm just going to call this spin, and in here we define at what stages we want elements to change. Now obviously all we need to do here is say, well, from 0 to 100% we want to rotate this, so we use the transform property. So we say rotate, and then we give a degree amount, so 360 degrees. So all this is doing, just to recap, is for the entire length of the animation, it's rotating it 360 degrees, which you can imagine starts at the point it's at, rotates 360 degrees back to the point it's currently at, and then we just start the animation again. So to apply this to our spinner, we need to use the animation property. So we provide the name of the animation, the time in which we want the animation to complete. I'm going to choose 600 milliseconds. You can choose second values or do something like 0.5 seconds for 500 milliseconds. But I'm going to choose 600 milliseconds. We want to choose how many times we want this to repeat. So we could choose 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. But I'm going to say infinite. We want this to keep rotating. And we're going to choose a linear type. So basically we can have things like ease in, out, which basically define how the animation moves from its start to its end point. Linear, you can imagine, just keeps it consistent. So at the moment, this isn't actually going to work because within Chrome, I require the vendor prefix, the WebKit vendor prefix, and this is the same for Safari as well. So let's go ahead and just copy this and we'll make a few changes. Now, the most difficult part about this is deciding how to combine the actual WebKit vendor prefix keyframes rule with the properties inside of this. So if that doesn't make sense, I'll explain. The vendor prefix here is WebKit, and this allows this to be picked up by WebKit browsers of their own implementation. So it's just a different implementation between different browsers. But in here now, we might also want to include WebKit rotate. WebKit transform. And that would be sensible. And we might then also include the standard transform property without the vendor prefix, which makes sense. And we'd also have to modify this rule as well to say WebKit animation. So now this is spinning because the WebKit version has been picked up and this version, which currently wouldn't be supported within Chrome, doesn't get picked up. So that's how we deal with things. There's probably a little bit of ongoing debate, especially at the time of recording, as to whether you should include the vendor prefix versions inside of this. So for example, WebKit, Mozilla, etc. Because if this is made non-vendor prefix, so if this is standardized, then these may not be. So transforms might not be. So really it depends, but I'm just going to leave these as the following. I'm actually going to remove this from here. So I'm assuming that once this becomes vendor prefix free, then the transform property will also. But you might want to go ahead and read up on that, or you might want to include them all in here. So let's get on with our vendor prefix, just so this works in all browsers. So we've got WebKit. Let's now do Mozilla. So this will be for Firefox, etc. Mozilla transform rotate, and then the standard property there again. And let's do this once again, but let's do this for Opera. And then change this here. And there we go. We don't need to include the MS prefix because it was never prefixed in Internet Explorer. It just uses the standard keyframes, whichever version of Internet Explorer this supports. So we've now got this vendor prefixed here with the vendor prefix keyframe rule, and the same with Mozilla and WebKit, as well as the non-vendor prefix version. But we now need to update these, so let's just duplicate this down. So we have WebKit, Moz, and O. Obviously in Chrome this still works, but you can go ahead and load up Opera, Mozilla, Safari, and this will also work. So that's how we build a very basic CSS spinner without any need for images, JavaScript, or anything else.